U.S. President Donald Trump says talks will be resuming today to end the war with Iran and resume maritime traffic in the Strait of Hormuz. To talk more about it and discuss some other news stories coming out of the American capital, we're joined by our Washington correspondent, Reggie Cecchini. Reggie, President Trump says he's giving diplomacy another chance after he called off new strikes on Iran over the weekend. What led to this decision, and how are the peace talks progressing?
Well, in terms of the peace talks, Jason, it's unclear. The president wasn't overly clear about who would be involved in these talks, where they might actually be held, and the Iranians, through the foreign ministry in the country, have pushed back to say that there are no new negotiations that are underway with the Americans, though they say that there are some kind of conversations taking place between the Iranians and the Omanis about a potential clear path near the Omani coast in the Strait of Hormuz, potentially to try and increase the number of vessels that can get through. But this call off of the strikes, it happened on the weekend in the hours before market futures opened up after a phone call between Donald Trump and the Saudi Crown Prince MBS, where Mohammed bin Salman essentially, according to the reports, asked the Americans to hold off on these strikes because every time America strikes, Iran lashes out, and it lashes out on countries in the region. And we've seen whether it's Qatar or the Saudis or Bahrain or Kuwait, all of them, especially if there's an American base nearby, they wind up in the crosshairs. So there was a push here from allies in the Middle East to try and get something worked out here. The bigger question here, Jason, is there actually some form of negotiation underway? And if not, or it's not to the satisfaction of the president, do the strikes start again?
Okay, and staying in the Middle East now, Israel has resumed strikes on what it calls Hamas operatives in Gaza. This comes just days after Trump announced a deal to disarm the militant group. What do these strikes tell us about the future of this deal?
Right, a couple of different days of strikes from the Israelis into Gaza. The most recent killing 13, according to local health officials. The Israelis claiming that they killed 2 Hamas commanders. But this really steps on what the Board of Peace had announced late last week, in that they had reached a deal with Hamas where Hamas would start to disarm, or at least disarm some of the factions within Gaza, and then move towards a multi-phase plan to kind of end the war in the region. The issue here is Hamas has already said out loud, in order for this to happen, the Israelis would have to live up to the obligations that they signed on to last year, and that includes removal of the IDF. The Israeli energy minister in the last couple of hours have said that's likely not going to happen. A redeployment would essentially allow for Hamas to reoccupy Gaza in the eyes of the Israelis, and they feel that pulling the military out would be more harm than it would be good. So significant questions here as to whether whatever was signed here with the Board of Peace is actually going to move beyond that signature, and if the continued strikes from the IDF into Gaza force Hamas to retaliate further. This is another one set to be watched.
Okay, and turning to Washington now, where the acting attorney general has terminated Trump's fund to compensate political allies following weeks of negotiations with the two senators, who were blocking his nomination. What more do we know about this decision?
Well, the decision is going to be significant come Tuesday, and that is because if this move satisfies 2 Republican congressmen, Cornyn and Tillis, this could pave the way for Todd Blanche moving out of acting into sitting attorney general, and it's something that would also satisfy President Donald Trump. All of this comes from the fact that there was this lawsuit that Donald Trump filed against the IRS for $10 billion. The money from a settlement was going to be used as an anti-weaponization fund that could be given to people who were convicted of storming the Capitol on January 6th and anybody else who feels that they were politically persecuted under the Biden administration. This didn't sit well with some of these Republicans who argued that it would be giving people who attacked police officers some kind of financial compensation. There was also concerns here that the wording around the IRS settlement would mean that Donald Trump in the future could never be audited again. What we've heard from Todd Blanche is that the weaponization fund is dead, and the audits of Donald Trump will be limited to Donald Trump Jr., his son Eric, the Trump Organization, for anything that was opened up until recently, but not in the future. Again, questions here as to whether this is actually going to kind of stick. We've seen people sit down for confirmation hearings in the past, and they ultimately go back on their words. But if this is enough to satisfy those 2 Republicans, this could be precisely what's needed for the United States to finally have a sitting attorney general after Pam Bondi resigned in April.
Okay, switching gears now. Late last week, the administration also dropped charges against a former Olympian for deliberately damaging the reflecting pool in Washington, citing flawed installation. Trump had repeatedly blamed vandalism for the damage. How's he reacting now?
He's still blaming vandals. He put on social media that he doesn't think that Judge Jeanine Pirro ultimately made the right decision here. He believes that there are still people that were responsible for damaging the reflecting pool. He still stands by his comments that somebody made a 350-yard gash in the center of the pool, even though Pirro's office has said it's not likely possible that somebody would be able to do that. So you have the administration doubling down. You have the Department of the Interior also doubling down, echoing what the president is saying here, trying to say that this was a mistake on behalf of the attorney. The question here going forward is what's ultimately going to happen. We've seen Pirro say that this was done by shoddy construction. That construction company is already in the process of redoing for a second time what was already a $14 million renovation. We need to see what happens to the other people who have been caught up in charges. All of them have pleaded not guilty to this. But again, it goes to show that, even though the administration believes one thing, says one thing, even if there's no proof, they will still dig their heels in. And we have to remember, in the weeks leading up to all of this, there was a motorcade that drove on the reflecting pool when it had no water in it with Donald Trump and various other of the vehicles in the motorcade. There are questions about whether that may have ultimately caused some damage as well.
Okay, and finally, this weekend, Trump's Truth Social platform started selling early access to his social media posts. So what are some of the concerns being raised here about transparency and conflict of interest?
There are legal concerns here and there are ethical concerns here, and Wall Street, for the most part, is walking away from this because they don't want to get tied up in this. But you're right, $100,000 a month for access to Donald Trump's Truth Social account to get an early look at what some of the things may be posted here. And the question here becomes, what if Donald Trump is set to post something that could have an influence on the markets or could have an influence on government policy, and it's only people on Wall Street or people who are willing to shell out that kind of money have access to it? Again, conflicts of interest, ethical concerns, legal concerns, whether or not this is the president making money off of the presidency. These are all significant questions here, and really it can go back to the war in Iran, Jazen, and that's because many of the moves that Donald Trump makes are announced on social media first. And if something is posted where investors are able to get an idea and possibly juice the markets or walk away from something, this could have a significant impact that ripples out of Wall Street and right around the world. So a lot of questions here, but this is something that was telegraphed and we knew that it was coming.
Okay, Reggie, thank you so much for these updates.
Thank you.
That is our Washington correspondent, Reggie Cecchini.